one of the biggest problems right now is that there's a lack of clarity about what trees can be cut down, what trees cannot be cut down, and there's not a mechanism to increase protections, and in the cases that the tree needs to be cut down, a way to plant more trees.
Seattle City Council member Dan Strauss right there, talking to me on Council Edition on the Seattle channel about his plan to do what has been an impossible task in Seattle in the past few decades, create a new tree protection ordinance. Strauss also the last holdout among the incumbents to say if he's running again, because even more council members are jumping ship. We're going to cover that, plus your input needed on some tweaks to the plans to expand sound transit. Well, grab your Orca Pass and click your heels 3 times. We're going to talk about those stories and a whole lot more this week on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel, and the views expressed here are mine, all mine. My co-host is none other than David Croman of the Seattle Times. And David, I saw your great tweet last week that the Chinese balloon incident was a lot like a Twilight Zone episode. What were you trying to break down there?
Oh, just that, everyone was trying to figure out why this balloon was there. But it made me remember this Twilight Zone episode where there's these aliens that didn't do anything except for flip the lights on and off in a town, and then the townspeople all tore each other apart on their own. And so maybe that's what this is, because suddenly everyone's kind of sniping at each other over what to do about this balloon, when maybe the balloon is just only there to get people to snipe at each other.
Yeah, tough to say. That was such a weird time. Still, I know a lot of fallout, as it were, still happening from that one. So we'll see what happens. But let's stay on this journey into a wondrous land whose boundaries are that of the imagination as we continue here. And I have to say thank you, David. Thanks to City Grind Espresso, our background noise sponsor for the audio podcast on the first floor of City Hall. And a big thanks to our patrons, too. That Seattle News, Views, and Brews sticker. Let's see if I can grab one up here. I know I've got a few here. I actually finally sent one out this week. Patrons who support us at the $5 level can get one of these, and they are beauties, folks. Check it out right here. I actually sent one to Linda, one of our patrons who joined us just a few weeks ago. I just sent it your way, Linda. Make sure you grab that up and let us know about it. I'm working my way down the list so all of our patrons get one. So get your very own. If you listen, support the show at the $5 level, and this is yours. Also, a thanks to Converge Media for airing the video version of the podcast. That's Wednesday nights at 7. And let's get started with Right Here, Right Now. So this week in the Land Use Committee of the Seattle City Council, it begins. A decades-long battle being taken up again to put some tree protection measures in place. Councilmember Dan Strauss is the chair of that committee. He says he's going to have a series of meetings throughout this month and into next. And by this spring, Seattle should have some new protection for trees legislated actually on the table here, and they're going to vote on it. And David, the question that I asked Councilmember Strauss on Council Edition, and I want to pose this to you as well, is this. How do you create legislation that protects trees but does not turn into a weapon for people who want to block density from happening in their neighborhoods? This is such a tough discussion.
Yeah, I don't really know the answer to that, because it has been used that way. I think for some people it's about kind of specifically old trees, and I do think that there's a way you can accommodate density without bringing down some of these old trees. Duplexes and triplexes and like that. Take up basically the same amount of lot space as some of these single family homes. So, I think this bill in particular, nothing jumps out at me that immediately kind of conflicts with the city's housing goals. It doesn't. But, I guess where there could be some concerns from people who want to see more housing build is it's another avenue for, appeals and delays and notices and things like that. So that I could see where it could be weaponized. But, if you just kind of take it at its face value, it doesn't mean to do that necessarily. But, you never know how these things can be kind of manipulated and worked.
Right. And I know there's going to be a lot of talk about this over the next several weeks here. And so the first part of this discussion this week, folks, about this talks about licensing for tree service providers, as they're called, and specifically calls on the Seattle Department of Construction and Inspections, SDCI, to create a map-based online system that would actually show where all major tree cutting is happening in the city. Sounds like a massive job, but a very important one, David, because in the past, and I know the Seattle Times has reported this, tree cutting has been a bit of a Wild West kind of a situation. Tree cutters coming in the middle of the night with covered license plates and other craziness like that. Some thoughts about monitoring trees and tree cutting, because I know that's another important part of this too.
Yeah, there was that case, I don't remember exactly what year it was, 2019, 2018, where some folks in West Seattle
That's
cut
right.
down a bunch of trees for their own view, and it became a pretty big story. I think they maybe ended up facing criminal charges. I don't remember exactly. At least civil fines.
There was definitely that part. Yeah.
So yeah, there is that. I think it's basically kind of impossible. I mean, I know that the city has its registry of, like, what do they call them? Extraordinary trees, or
Yes, yeah, significant, extraordinary, all these different.
some.
They're actually working on changing that, as I understand it. So it's going to be like a tier 1, 2, 3 type things. They're trying to change some of the nomenclature there, and hopefully, maybe that'll change things up a little bit.
Yeah. So yeah, it seems like a tough thing to monitor. I mean, the city, when you fly over Seattle, you see it's, compared to other cities, it's got a lot of trees. So it seems like a difficult task to monitor them all. The thing that I think about sometimes when I hear the tree canopy debate, and this is going a little far afield,
Please.
but I live out in Kitsap County, and down the road, there's 200 acres of second growth forest.
Okay.
And it was a lot of it was just bulldozed because they're making a new development with, I think it's going to be a bunch of single family kind of McMansion style things. And,
Okay. All right.
that's the kind of argument that I think some housing density advocates make around tree canopy is, if you're not allowing density in the cities and you're not building new housing in the cities, what ends up happening is people move out of the city because they can't afford it, or are looking for something else. And then that creates pressure to, a lot of times it's farmland or wetlands or flood zones and things like that. But in this case, there was 200 acres of second growth forest with a pretty robust understory that got cleared, in part because there are more developmental pressures outside of Seattle, because Seattle itself doesn't allow for quite as much housing to be built. And so that's always that. Whenever I talk, hear about tree canopy, I do think that there's a little bit of an invisible side effect to using tree canopy ordinances to prevent housing from being built. And sometimes it is that more trees get torn up in places that maybe they wouldn't have otherwise had more housing been built in Seattle.
Yeah, some unintended consequences there to consider for sure. And I'm really glad you brought that up, David, because when you think about the tree canopy, it's not just confined to one city, right? I mean, it extends over the entire earth. And if you look at it from a larger regional perspective, I know there's a lot more to say there. Well, we'll let the city council try to hash that one out. I did want to work on another piece of their agenda for this week, checking the list. The Economic Development and Technology Committee is talking about police surveillance. We're going to keep an eye on that. But the full council has an ordinance up for a vote on the historic preservation and how that works in our city, that whole process, how these projects are reviewed. So in 2020, during the pandemic, you might remember, these volunteer boards who review these projects had some challenges meeting. The council temporarily said, all right, smaller scale projects with historic properties, let's let the Department of Neighborhoods handle that, along with the city's historic preservation officer. So now that the pandemic emergency is over, and we're seeing a few of these things happen at the city level right now, the city is looking to make this a permanent situation. It feels a lot like the discussion we recently had about design review. And I guess I just wanted to ask this bigger question, David. Did the city of Seattle actually learn from this pandemic, oh my gosh, that maybe it needs a little bit less of the infamous Seattle process? What do you think?
Well, I guess we'll find out. There was it was kind of a refreshing reprieve in some ways from the Seattle process on some fronts.
Right.
On the other hand, some things totally ground to a halt. So it was kind of both sides of that coin. I think of, the streeteries, the street cafes, those kind of just popped up overnight. There wasn't a lot of discussion about it, not a lot of pushback. And now that there are conversations around making those more permanent, also from Councilmember Strauss, it's starting to kind of the Seattle process creep is starting to seem to occur. I've seen that there's some discussions around historic preservation on Ballard Avenue, where there's a lot of
yes, of course.
So, the Seattle process is a powerful force, and it's not something that's going to go away immediately. It's going to be there, and I think about that. It's an interesting sidebar to this, but I should point out the larger projects out there that are in historic districts will still be reviewed by this Historic Preservation Review Board.
Seattle has 8 historic districts, more than 450 individual landmarks, so it would appear they'll stay busy. But I just think about, maybe, is there a larger impact on that very civic-minded individual volunteering her or his time for a board like this, as in, Seattle doesn't need you that much, but please stick around. I get like a Jared Kellenick vibe out of this. I don't know.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, and this is kind of a perennial debate too around how much to involve people. You got all these commissions in Seattle.
Yeah. You want the public involved? Sure. Yeah.
Most of these commissions tend to be advisory, but there's a million of them. And then there was the neighborhood councils that Ed Murray sort of tried to get rid of and replace them with something else, which, of course, people who wanted less process and were happy about. And then, of course, the members of the councils were mad about that. So, I think we'll talk about Sound Transit later, too. There's always this balance between wanting to look responsive to what people want and public feedback, while also recognizing that there is a certain bias in who is capable of providing that feedback, and people who have the time and energy and resources to spend time doing this are more represented than people who don't. And so, it's always kind of an interesting thing. I don't know that anyone would argue you cut the public out of these processes completely, but there does seem to be a limit to which having too much input just kind of indefinitely delays things, or waters them down or compromises them so much that they don't achieve their original goals.
Yeah. And on Council Edition this month as well, I wanted to point out that Dan Strauss is talking about design review. He says the process is broken. And I think that's kind of the realization that some people came to during the pandemic. And we'll see what happens with historic preservation, because, as I say, 8 historic districts in our city, a lot of activity happening there that might go under the radar. But thank you for that back and forth, David. All right. And then there were 5. Now it's a majority of the Seattle City council members who don't want to return to the job next year. Is this a sinking ship or a big opportunity for city leadership? We're going to break it down on Now Hear This. So who's not running for city council this fall has turned into the bigger story over the past few weeks. And now a citywide council member who is not up for re-election this year wants to leave the job too. City council member Teresa Mosqueda, who won her second term in 2021, wants to join the King County Council and run for Joe McDermott's District 8 seat. He recently went public, said he wasn't running again. So when she runs, you can bet she's going to tout the work she has done to put the Jumpstart Big Business Tax in place in Seattle and the dollars it has brought in, something she has celebrated with her supporters. She did so just a few months ago.
Building homes, building units, building a sense of joy and pride and respect for people to call home. You all made this possible, and it is my privilege to be able to work in partnership with you to make Jumpstart a reality in Seattle.
David, a few pieces fit here. McDermott's district covers West Seattle, which is where Mosqueda lives. She's always seemed to be striving for greater things on the city council, from my perspective. What do you make of her decision to run for King County Council?
It's interesting. It caught me by surprise.
Me too.
I didn't see this coming. Of course, I cover these things as closely as I used to. But, it makes sense on a few different fronts. For one, just people don't ever talk about the county council. You don't hear, they don't catch nearly the same amount of flack as the Seattle City Council, which is probably unfair because the King County Council is in charge of a lot of the things that people are the most upset about. They really have a big hand in homelessness, biggest hand in behavioral health and mental health.
That's right.
Which, those are kind of the big issues right now. So, I think it makes sense. There's the sort of, let's say, like maybe more cynical reasons you could understand why she would want to do this, which is take some of the heat off of her. And if she, I think Erica Barnett made this point, which I thought was a good one. If she does want to reach for higher office, which seems to be the case, putting some distance between her and the Seattle City Council is probably not a bad idea. But then there's the kind of more, the more earnest and maybe sincere reasons behind this, which is what Councilmember Mosqueda has said, which is it would give her a bigger hand in some of the issues that she cares the most about, around behavioral health, around homelessness, around
Yep.
How affordable housing and things like that. And so it surprises me. It surprised me because I just didn't see it coming. But now that it's happening, I can kind of understand it.
Yeah.
I think I don't know who's going to run against her. You got to think her odds at winning the seat are really, really good because she's coming out of the gates. If it's sort of the last 15, 20 years, maybe 10 or 15 years, if you're a candidate and you come out of the gate with support from kind of business folks,
labor
folks, it's sort of an unbeatable formula. And so she comes out with endorsements from Bruce Harrell, which is kind of surprising to me. Dow Constantine, but then also tons of progressive and labor folks. It's a coalition of people that has proven difficult for people to beat in the past. She's going to raise a ton of money. She's running in a area that's probably a little more friendly to her. Even kind of South King County, it's more diverse, probably more progressive. She's kind of been seen as a bulwark of sort of practical progressivism in the city, and so I think there's a fairly high chance that she is the fifth, maybe sixth, depending on Dan Strauss, person to leave the council. But in this case, because she wins a different seat.
Right. Yeah, I think about when she won both of her elections in 2017 and 2021, 60% of the vote both times. So you're right. She does have a strong coalition she's worked with. She did lean on democracy vouchers in both those elections. So we'll see where the fundraising goes. But I think you're right, too. She's not going to have trouble raising money. I did want to talk about this. 5 members of the city council basically don't want the job in 2024. Mosqueda, Herbold, Sawant, Peterson, Juarez just making it official. Depending on the Mosqueda result, we'd have a majority of new members on the city council next year. And potentially, if you think about it, if we've got these 7 seats, then you got Mosqueda too. There's potentially 8 new members of the city council out of 9 next year. I'm just trying to figure out what larger impact, what message does this say about city leadership right now and kind of where it stands. That's a lot of turnover potentially.
Yeah, it's huge. And I think that says a lot about the nature of the job. I mean, it's a tough job. There's a lot of expectations on that body. I mean, a lot of reasonable expectations on that body, and some legitimate criticisms around the city's progress on homelessness in particular and housing. I don't want to undersell that. Those are all real and legitimate criticisms. And also, I do think that that body has hit a point where it's become the highest profile, and so I think people kind of expect that it can do more than it can in some ways. And so it's kind of a brutal combination of legitimate criticisms around issues that the city has not progressed on quickly enough, combined with an inflated sense of how powerful that body is. Means that there's approval ratings of the council have been in under 30% for years now. So it's not all that surprising. I think we'll see. I mean, that's not going to keep people from running though.
No.
These races are going to be really full. But I think that big turnover is going to have really big implications, in particular for housing long term, because it's going to be whoever that next body is that's going to nail down the comprehensive plan. So there's kind of a lot.
That's right. Here. That's a huge part here. And I think about this when district elections went in place. I know a lot of people were excited about it, but I mean, just with that district piece, you're talking about 7 seats that are up every 4 years. And I just wonder, and I have to think the council's thinking about this too, if there's any way to stagger that in some way such that the turnover is not that great, because say what you will about incumbents sticking around too long, there's also something to be said for some stability of a governing body too. So interested to see where that one goes. But I did want to move on to our double dose of transportation goodness on the podcast this week, Talking Sound Transit here. The System Expansion Committee meeting this Thursday, folks, and you can provide in-person feedback at the Union Station on Wednesday from 3 to 7 p.m. David, just a massive story here. It's always tough to figure out where to focus, but I wondered if we could look briefly at the Chinatown ID station. A lot of pushback, as we know, in that neighborhood last year regarding this station. It appears some feedback's coming in, and I'm struck by this delicate balance as I look at some of these plans here. Just in this neighborhood, Should we site rail in the spot that is right in the CD, or a spot that's just north, just to the south? Maybe there's less impact if it's north or south, but that's kind of debatable. But if you make a system that's less convenient, or fewer people going to use it, have you looked at some of these proposals that Sound Transit is considering?
Yeah, well, there was the basically four, kind of two-ish maybe that had been debated, which is Fifth Avenue or Fourth Avenue, and then at each of them, deep or shallow.
Right.
Those, I think from a pure transit perspective, advocates for the people who are really invested in the construction of this rail system would probably say that the Fifth Avenue shallow option is the best from a pure transit perspective, because it creates the easiest transfers, the least amount of time on an escalator going up and down, which, of course, we all know about Sound Transit's escalators.
It's a big deal, yeah.
But the big complication here is that would put it kind of in the heart of a neighborhood that has had a lot of struggles lately. It's majority communities of color, lower income, and so that's the thing with this whole expansion is you cannot look at the options in a vacuum for what presents the best transit option. Sometimes it means doing so means affecting the people who live around that area, and this is kind of the prime example of that. The risk is, as you said, is if you move it to Fourth or make it deep, it becomes a less effective transit system. And now there has been some push for a kind of fifth, or maybe you could say third, however you want to quantify it, option just to the north, so it's not even in the Chinatown International District really anymore. That too, though, is kind of seen as far as, again, as a pure transit option, perhaps the worst, because you're furthest away from transfers and so yeah, I mean, no one that you talk to on the Sound Transit board loves basically any of their options at any place here, because everyone you have to balance everything I just said. The Chinatown International District just is particularly sensitive because of its history and because of who lives there.
Well, just in talking about that, do you think Sound Transit has covered enough bases now in terms of public feedback? Are we going to see more protests out of the CID? Where do you think that goes?
Yeah, I don't think we will stop seeing protests until it's done being built. And even then, we might still see protests. So,
right.
Yeah, it's hairy. I don't think the protests will ever stop.
Yeah, it's not right. I don't think anyone's going to be completely happy with this. The transit advocates, the people who want to make sure that the CID is preserved and you don't disturb that neighborhood too much, but definitely a lot to consider. And heads up, folks, I mentioned those public meetings right off the top. If you cannot make those, there is an online survey on Sound Transit's website. You can put in your preferences. You can do that up to February 17th, so make sure you do that and check it out. All right, coming up, a big boost of federal transportation dollars coming into Seattle, and where are they headed? David's got the deal on Transportation Talk. So, David, just after our last podcast hit air last week, you had a piece in the Seattle Times breaking down the story on some new federal transportation dollars coming to the city. And I don't want to give you too much credit, but it's almost like Senator Cantwell has been reading your articles on safety in the SoDo neighborhood, because it sounds like that's where the dollars are going, right?
Yeah, no, I would.
The Croman proviso. That's what I was working here. Yeah.
This is the safety concerns of SoDo are nothing that Senator Cantwell's office were not capable of figuring out on their own.
Fair. Okay.
But although I appreciate that. No, I mean, it's this is real money. It's $26 million. That's a good amount of money. Obviously, in the grand scheme of transportation, it's not actually that much money, but that could conceively bring some number of miles, 4 miles of bike lane, and that's not nothing going through there. And in a few different really dangerous spots, some of this kind of SoDo area. It's not specifically so. I mean, there's some work that's proposed to be done on the other side of the West Seattle Bridge. But I think that this is kind of pegged as a priority area because there have been a lot of collisions and deaths and near collisions and near deaths down there. And it has the kind of combined, the walking, biking world obviously wants to see it safer down there. But, the freight and industry down there would also like to see more separation between their big old trucks and the people that are not in cars.
Yeah, and I was going to ask about that. Is there going to be some impact on freight? I think about the Burke-Gilman Trail and the back and forth with industry that's always gone on there in that neighborhood of Ballard. And what are we going to see in SoDo? I'm hoping the two sides can work together here, the advocates for bikes and walking and the people who want to make sure that freight gets through. How's that going to interact?
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, the freight and industry world, they say they want actually bike lanes, kind of protected bike lanes that are separate from the roads because that's better for them. Also, the big point of philosophical disagreement, I think, is when you talk to people in kind of the industry and freight down there, they see the option, that the solution as being, some kind of totally separate bike lane that's like almost a detour through there. Whereas the kind of bike and pedestrian advocates want to see basically all the streets turned into something that's safer for people to walk and bike so that you don't have to go out of your way and take an inefficient route just to get on a safe bike lane. So that's kind of going to be the big philosophical disagreement, I think, there. But, again, this is a happy problem to have that argument when you actually have money in the bank.
Right. And this is something, do you have an idea on timeline at all in terms of when this work would get going?
No, not exactly. I think in the next year or two, but no, not off the top of my head. I have to remind myself.
Okay.
Say a year that turns out to be wrong.
Right. And it looks like it's concentrated in SoDo. Are there other parts, or does it look like it's basically that kind of neck of the woods?
I think it's kind of concentrated in SoDo, but it does, as I mentioned, it goes to other parts of town too. There's a proposal on. What is it? I can't remember the street, but in West Seattle.
East Marginal. I know they're talking
East Marginal, yeah, exactly. Yep. A proposal to do a bike lane there. And there's some projects, because in addition to bike lanes, a lot of this money is also going to go towards things like fixing ADA non-compliant curb ramps and improving signalization at intersections. And that work is going to be happening kind of in a lot of places around the city, which is going to happen anyway because a federal court told Seattle it has to fix its curb ramps, but this will give the city a little bit more money to maybe move a little faster on some of those projects. And so that's going to be scattered around the city. The kind of sidewalk projects, the new sidewalks and new bike lanes, that's going to be kind of concentrated around SoDo. And then, as I said, just on the west side of the West Seattle Bridge.
Yeah, so West Marginal is the phrase I was looking for there. East Marginal is on the other side there. So, yeah, just so I can get my cardinal directions right. All right, well, I wanted to make sure to wrap up with your, David, I had to give you some props for your commentary on Twitter. Sometimes the Steely Dan haters come out, and I thought you dealt with that appropriately. It's like, sure, you can criticize, but still, I cranked that up on the radio too. I mean, come on, they're in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for a reason, right?
Yeah, they're cheesy. They're too slick. They're overproduced. There's not a lot of grit to them. I understand all of those criticisms, and I still love them. It's the same reason I still kind of love. Like you could say a lot of those things about Fleetwood Mac too. It's easy and sometimes over emotional, but you know what? Sometimes I just want slick music, and Steely Dan is the best of the slick music.
It's that 70s groove, man. I feel like it feels like a Big Lebowski conversation. Like, don't play the Hurricane Eagles, right? But it's sometimes you need to crank up My Old School, and I'm fine with that. So thank you for being on the same page with me there, David. And thank you as always for contributing to the show. Thanks to everybody listening on, well, wherever you listen, Apple, Spotify, wherever you might check out the podcast. You're listening to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. This podcast is all over the place, and it's also on Patreon, so we want to make sure that you check it out there and show your support. Thank you also for watching on Converge Media 2. We'll see you next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2023.